The title of today's talk is Continuous Integration and Distribution in the Cloud with DEVcloud, and showing how we can do all these wonderful things just in the cloud. My name is Mark Galpin, not Baruch Sidorsky. I am a solution architect with JFrog. And people sometimes ask what a solution architect at JFrog actually does. Well, I focus on three basic aspects of JFrog's work. Working with customers like yourselves, hopefully. Working with communities such as, well, here the Jenkins community. And working with our partners on custom integrations and more advanced packaging techniques. You know, most recent example is that we've developed a mechanism to deploy Artifactory to Cloud Foundry, but I do stuff like that as well. So I do lots of exciting things. I mean, the reality is that my job is just to do cool things with JFrog's products, and that's really easy to do. So who is JFrog? Well, we're originally an Israeli company. Once upon a time, this picture would have been of about 3 or 4 people, not 70 sitting under a plane, but we've grown a bit over the years. We now have a US office. Gee, the color is really bad. And a French office. We're a bit crazy about frogs. Kind of frog in the name. We love frogs. If you have cool frog pics, bring them by our booth. They'll do something cool for you. And we're the makers of JFrog Artifactory and Bintray. We just renamed our product from Artifactory to JFrog Artifactory because nobody had ever heard of JFrog before. And this is, our marketing department assures us, the correct solution to that problem. So I want to talk about what this talk is about. Perhaps at some point your boss has come up to you and said, I want a modern software pipeline for continuous integration. I hear these buzzwords about DevOps and continuous integration and continuous distribution. I hear all these buzzwords. Make it happen right now. Don't bug me. I'll see you tomorrow. Show me a demo. Of course, none of you have bosses like that. I'm sure all of your bosses are wonderful, reasonable people. Certainly mine is. He might see the video of this, so I have to say that. And you ask him, well, what do you mean by a modern software pipeline? And he says, well, you know, like all the cool guys do it. So the one I'm going to show you is the way JFrog does it, using our own products, pretty much out of the box. You can certainly get more complicated than the one I'm going to show you, but it's pretty robust, even just out of the box without customization. So what are the requirements when we talk about a modern software pipeline? So the first requirement is automation. Releases need to be controlled, absolutely, but it shouldn't be a big process. I was out talking to somebody in the financial industry recently at, in fact, a trading floor. I'm not going to say which one because this is kind of embarrassing about them. And so we were talking, what is your release process? And they said, well, you know, every day at 2 p.m., the release manager sends out an email and says, deploy these binaries to these servers, and then we copy them out of our product, and then we SCP to each server individually. If that is you, then this talk and the need to automate is a big deal. Although I'm not really going to talk so much about that end of things for SaaS solutions, but you know, if automation is important. The other big thing is it has to be enterprise ready. I love open source. JFrog is a heavily dedicated to open source as a community. But the reality is that most of the code that most of us work on is probably not open source. And so whatever we do has to be something that can handle the open source stuff and be able to grab open source community so I can leverage that. But it also has to be able to handle the needs of my proprietary project in-house. And of course, I have to have control, because as soon as I have my company's IP involved, I have to have very careful controls over who has access to what. So what is the process to meet that spec of a software pipeline? Well, step one, you need some place to store your source. I would hope by 2015 that this is a self-evident statement. If not, I understand that GitHub does have a booth here. Feel free to check them out. You need to be able to build your binaries. You need some place to store your binaries. You could be deploying your binaries out somewhere, or you would need to distribute your binaries to some location. As I mentioned, I'm going to really focus on distributing your binaries out to customers or to worldwide teams and that sort of situation. The SaaS discussion is very interesting, and there's lots of great stuff I could talk about with that, but that's a different talk, not this one. And so that sounds like a lot of work to do before, tomorrow for your boss. And you probably have enough hats already. And that's where the cloud comes to your rescue. In the cloud as a service, yes, absolutely, you can get everything you need out in the cloud as a service, no maintenance at all. And hopefully, that's interesting to you. Although if not, I will say that pretty much everything I'm going to show also works on-prem. So what does that mean? Well, so the first step, of course, is you're going to write code. And even if you don't write code personally, I'm confident that your company has awesome code writers that are doing awesome things. And the first thing they should be doing is committing it to source. So where are you going to get source control? Well, the reality is there are lots of really great cloud services for source control. But I'm here talking about the Jenkins DEVcloud and how that works with JFrog's products. So I'm going to suggest that you can just use the Git repository that comes with DEVcloud. It works with the Git client quite nicely. And that's what I decided to do for this demo. And one of the big advantages of that is that you can be guaranteed that your repository is going to be network close to your Jenkins server, and that will make your build faster. So once you've done a commit, the next thing that's likely to happen is that you probably have some sort of CI server that builds on commit. And so next step is, of course, to pick a CI server. Given where we are, that isn't a very hard decision. We will, of course, use Jenkins and DEVcloud. So what do I like about DEVcloud? So the things I like about DEVcloud is that it's in the cloud. I don't have to maintain it. It's Jenkins. This is a tool we all know and love and know how to use. Nothing new I have to learn or worry about. And one of the really awesome things about Jenkins is that it has many, many different plugins for pretty much any use case I might have out there. And this gives me immense flexibility within my CI server to cover anything I need to do. So now that I have a CI server, where is the CI server going to output its build products to? So one option is you can use the DEVcloud built-in repositories. One advantage of this is that it's network close, and it doesn't cost any money, which is always a nice thing. But the one problem with it is that it's not really a true binary repository. And this means that it lacks many of the features that a fully featured binary repository can provide. And hopefully I will be able to persuade you as to some of those. Because the solution to this problem is JFrog Artifactory and our cloud offering. And in fact, you can get this straight through DEVcloud, or you can get it through, through the JFrog website. I, of course, had an Artifactory Online instance before this talk, so I got it through the JFrog website, but you can also get it through DEVcloud. Why Artifactory Online? So the big thing about Artifactory is that we're focused all day, every day on managing your binaries. That is what we do as a company, and we worry about the problems related to that. And this means you get reproducible builds. And you get metadata to go with your artifacts for later steps in the process. If you want to keep an audit trail of your QA activities tied straight to your artifacts in your storage solution, a true binary repository can give you that capability. And again, Artifactory Online is in the cloud with no servers to maintain. And in fact, it's also still network close because the default location is the same as the location for DEVcloud in US East 1. And the other big thing, once you have the two products working together, is you can get the automatically generated build time metadata with the build information, dependency information, license information, environment variables. So as I said, we're still network close in US East 1 for both solutions. And we have a maintained plugin available for both DEVcloud and the on-prem Jenkins. You can just go out to your Manage Plugins and search for Artifactory plugin, and you will get our plugin pop up. Click a link, install it, it's done. So now that you have built your binary and done some initial testing on your snapshot build, you decide to promote it to a release build, you QA it, and the next thing is to come up with a way to distribute it. And the solution for distribution is Bintray. If I can ask, how many of you already heard of Bintray? Not too bad, actually. So as a company, JFrog looked at the market and we said, we've done a really great job at managing builds and managing the build process, but there's kind of this final step of, hey, I built this really awesome thing. I want to give it out to the world. How do I do that? And of course, you can do this with a standard file server, but this is a lot of extra work on your part, and it is a little bit slow. Or you can do it a more modern fashion with a CDN, and this will go very, very fast and allow you to track things, but setting up all of that on your own can be a bit of a pain. And Bintray has everything set up for you, maintains it, worries about conversing with the CDN distributors to deal with outages and all those wonderful things. And it has APIs for all the package managers and anything else that you might want in order to handle distribution to the world, not just for, hey, I want to give a file, click the link and download it, but I want to click a file and then I want to go out and get it with Maven. Or I want to submit an RPM that can be accessible by Yum. So who all uses it? Well, quite a few people do. Most of these today are still open source users, although we do also have some proprietary customers as well who are doing some really great things with it. But big names in the open source industry are things like Spring, Scala, Vagrant, Groovy. We're really excited with the number of people that have looked at our solution and really found that it just makes their life easier. And if you're doing open source, by the way, it would be free. And as I said, we also allow it for proprietary solutions. Mostly this screenshot is up there because of the Easter egg time they set up the Starship Enterprise for the Enterprise package. I just thought that was really cool, so I figured I'd put up the screenshot of it. It isn't always available. And it's as simple inside Jenkins as clicking a button for push to bin tray and filling out a couple of fields of what you want your package metadata to look like. And the Jenkins server will automatically push it out to bin tray through Artifactory and make it available. So I've done a lot of talking up here, and that's not really the interesting part of why people come to talks like this. Usually they want to see something cool. So what are you going to see? Well, it's the first thing you're going to see is that I'm going to go from source all the way out to file distribution with very few button clicks and manual steps. Not none, because of those issues about control, but very few. And in fact, I'll be doing even more than you actually strictly need to, just so you can kind of see what's going on. The second thing is that I hope I will convince you that if you love Jenkins today, you'll love even more Jenkins and the products I'm going to show you. But more than that, I want to convince you of the power you really get when you combine a CI server with a storage solution and a distribution platform, and the power of automating that end to end. And all of this is going to be in the cloud. Through the entire demo, I will touch nothing but the web browser, although I'm also not going to modify the source. If I was going to modify the source, I would, of course, have to open up a text editor and do a git push. So, without further ado, let's get to the demo. So let's go over to our Jenkins server. Again, this is a DEVcloud instance already set up. And I have one build already configured, Gradle Demo 1. And before I actually get this started, because let me make it a little bit bigger. That easier? I don't have a lot of control over the resolution of the screen, unfortunately. OK. So I'm actually going to show you how to configure a build and do some things. But before I even start that, I'm going to kick off a snapshot build. And while that's going, I'll show you how it all gets configured. So most of this up top is pretty standard stuff for configuring a Jenkins build, which hopefully you're already familiar with. A couple of extra things for the DEVcloud authorizations, getting all the keys inserted for that. I set up my source management with my Git repository, and I provide credentials through the DEVcloud interface. Go down to my build trigger. I want to do a build whenever a change is pushed out. And then I want to set up my build environment. Since I have the Artifactory plugin installed already, it gives me a bunch of options about different integrations with Artifactory. I picked the Gradle Artifactory configuration. This allows me to go out and select a server and see various repositories. When I do a refresh here, I actually get a list of the repositories available out on that server, so I don't have to know anything ahead of time. Make it really easy to configure. And then I have options for whether I want to use the Artifactory Gradle plugin. You don't actually need to check that box if you don't want to. Capturing, publishing build information, which is going to allow us to see build information. including environment variables. And I'm actually excluding any environment variable that might contain a password or a secret in it, so that I'm not publishing out details on my environment variables. I have options to allow promotion of non-stage builds, but since part of what I'm going to show you is the release process, I'm going to not use that so that we can go through a more traditional staging build and then into release. But if you want to promote straight from snapshots out to release, these checkboxes would allow it. We have the ability to run license checks, and where Artifactory will do its own scans of the open source licenses and confirm that they're all pre-approved licenses. Integration with Black Duck. The ability to discard old builds. Artifactory is going to be storing the result of this build. And so if you don't want to store all the builds, you can discard it, and then it will honor the same process that you honor in Jenkins for discarding builds that you set for your standard build rotation system. Publishing artifacts to Artifactory, that's kind of important because that's a lot of what we're trying to do. Setting up patterns, including artifacts. And then some more stuff on the release management of setting up the name of our branch and what Gradle property manages the version, and we'll show you why that's important in a moment. And then the configuration for invoking Gradle is set up. And while I've been talking about this, my build finished. So we can go out and look at the build. It's noted that it came because there's no changes. It was started by my JFrog user. Spent 13 seconds waiting in the queue and 13 seconds building. And it has a direct link out to the Artifactory build information. And that is where the binary repository, being more than just a single location, really comes in. Because now we have this metadata that's stored with my artifacts. What was the name of my build? What was the build number? Where was it built? Who is what tool was used to build it? When was it built? How long did the build take? What user account was used on the build server? What user account was used on Artifactory? And if I want to, it allows me to jump straight back to the Jenkins server so that I have a full two-way link between the two builds of the CI server and where they're stored in my artifact repository. And then I can go out, I can look at my published modules. This is a pretty simple thing since it's just a demo. So all it really has is the one module that's associated with the demo. And I can look out, I can see what it published. I can jump straight to the artifact inside Artifactory in my tree and take a look at its in-depth metadata if I wish, and even see what builds produced it. And you can actually see that I've done a couple of builds recently without changing my source. So I actually have 3 binary identical files that have been uploaded for snapshots. I can also look at my dependencies, which is probably much more interesting than the artifacts you build. You usually know what artifacts you built. It may be harder for you to determine exactly what they all depended on. And so here, I have not only what they depended on, but what scope each came in via. And I can jump again straight out to the tree, look at my artifact, get the specific metadata on that artifact, and all the builds that use that artifact across all time. I can also get a complete listing of the environment variables inside Jenkins, inside my Jenkins slave that was actually doing the build. I have the full captured list of all the environment variables, both the one specific to the build and the general environment variables of the slave. And this can be pretty important when it comes to reproducible builds, because environment variables can have a major impact on what your build does. And being able to capture this and have it stored with the artifact means you can come back a year later and reproduce exactly what the environment was that you did this build. I did not set this up, but if you had for example, the Jira plugin for Jenkins, and you had that configured, you can actually capture the Jira issues that were associated with the build. I mentioned licensing. So I have a list of licenses that are associated with it, with my dependencies, and again, what scope they're in. If I want to, I can select only individual scopes to see, and every time it keeps updating, do I have approved or unapproved licenses? And if you remember back in my configuration, I had an option to do that check during the build itself and send an email if any unapproved or unknown licenses came up. But where this gets really cool and really awesome is I can diff two builds. Because, of course, builds sometimes break. I know that all of you are perfect release engineers and never have a build break. But my builds, unfortunately, do sometimes break. And sometimes it's not because of the source code. It's because of the environment or the dependencies. And this ability to diff between two builds allows me to see exactly what's changed. So in this case, I made some changes to my published modules, but my dependencies were identical. My environment variables changed as related to the specifics of my build environment. But again, no real changes in my system variable, which isn't terribly surprising. This is two identical snapshot builds that I'm comparing here. One of the sad things about demos is that it's actually kind of hard to make really good, fun shows of how to do forensic investigations into broken builds in simple demos, because the really exciting build breakages require some fairly exciting infrastructure behind them. But nonetheless, this can be a very useful tool to know exactly what things have changed, or to prove to the developer who insists that his code can't possibly be wrong that the only thing that changed was his code. And we also have an option of a release history. I haven't yet released this build, so it has no release history. And all of this is stored in a JSON file for easy parsing. Or if for some strange reason you didn't want to use the Jenkins plugin, you could create this, this build JSON yourself and deploy it to create these same metadata associations inside Artifactory. So that gets me to step one, through the basic concept of building my builds. But the next thing I'm going to want to do is, after I've confirmed that my snapshot build is stable and I'm happy with it, I'm going to want to stage a release build. So the really cool thing is that I just click the button for Artifactory release staging, and everything is already pre-populated for me to go out and do it. So it knows my current release version. I've done this demo a few times by now. It knows that it has to increment to set up my my Gradle build files for my continuing snapshots, so that as my developers keep working, the next snapshots will go for the next build. We pre-configured what we wanted to call our release branch, and it's going to go out and build a release branch inside Git. Going to create a Git tag for me. I'm going to be able to put a comment in for my tag, a comment in for the commit to change the version number for future snapshots. And then I have to choose a repository to send it to. I do not want to send it to a snapshot repository because I'm now building a staging build, so I'm going to send it out to my staging build. And it allows me to here put in another comment inside Artifactory about the staging. And we're going to kick it off and build. And while that's building, I'm going to show a previous build. Build 67, I think I haven't released yet. Yes. So this is a previous build that I built, a previous release build that I staged. And you can see its release history so far is just that I staged it. And by now, of course, I've shown it to you in 71 finished building. So I now have, you see the difference between our snapshot builds and our stage builds is I have these two extra icons. So the first one I'm going to do is this icon, which will allow me, and it's also down here, allow me to do a release promotion. And release promotion is going to be really easy. Of course, the hard part of getting from staging to release promotion is the testing, and I left that out. But here, all I have to do is provide a comment and a repository, and hit update. And now if I go out to my build and check its release history, it will say it's been moved over to libs release local. And it will provide my comments. And if I were to go over to publish modules, it's now in libs release local. So it's now available to anybody who's only getting release builds. And then I can perform the final step of this process, which is to push it out to bin tray. If you want, you can have a pre-built descriptor file, which will handle taking care of everything for pushing to bin tray, but I just want to show you what's involved. It's not a whole lot. The first thing up is your bin tray subject or username or organization, what repository it's going to, the package name, and the version number. This was 134. If this was open source, you'd also need to provide license, an open source license, and a URL where your source is stored. But since this is not open source, I don't have to provide that. Well, it is open source, as it turns out, but I'm not building it as if it were. And I hit push to bin tray. And it's done. I go out now to bin tray. And I go to the Pro Demo repository. And here's my Gradle Demo 1 package. And you can see it says that somebody has pushed a whole bunch of stuff that isn't published yet. So I'm going to hit publish. And now those files are available. In the 1.34 directory, out with a proper Maven layout. And I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to show the jar file in the download list. And then if I go back to the package, you'll see that the version number is here, and right here in the download list, it's going to show what the latest version is. I can click download. I can also tweet about releasing a new version if I so desire. And I can also look at the statistics and see that one person has downloaded my package. I am very lonely. Not a lot of people download a demo that I just released 5 seconds ago. But hopefully your own package will have many more statistics. This can be really great if you want to track things like version adoption. It would show the different versions and what they look like. And that's pretty much it. It's available to the world. And that's an automated pipeline, as I said, all the way from release, from committing, all the way out to distributing it to the world. I gave that demo in 20 minutes, explaining every single step. And hopefully that's as exciting to you as it is to me. So, thank you very much to all the sponsors of Jenkins for allowing me to speak here. And does anybody have any questions? Yes?
Do you have a way to audit the legal process, like sometime for artifacts?
So, in the licensing section that we talked about, you have the legal team can indicate which licenses should be approved. That's an admin function to go out to licenses. And you can see here a long list of licenses. And an admin can go out and indicate which ones are approved.
What about for artifacts? For example, they may look at script 3.1 and 4.0. They say 4.0 had an issue. So they say,
security vulnerabilities?
Right.
So we don't provide that built in with Artifactory, but we do integrate with Black Duck. And we've also got customers that have done integrations of their own with Fortify. I have one customer that actually managed to go out and build a custom integration with OWASP. So there are ways to track that.
I would love to see this on here so I don't have to think of mail.
Yes. So today, the easiest out-of-the-box solution for that would be to get a Black Duck subscription and use the Black Duck integration of Artifactory.
Yeah, that's way expensive.
Pretty much. Well, to be fair, so first of all, we are looking at other solutions and trying to come up with a cheaper way to do this for our customers. But one thing to understand about those security tools is that a company that focuses on security, I mean, they've got a lot of work they have to do to keep track of all of that for you. We're really trying to come up with some more open source cloud type solutions. And if we come up with a way to do that for free that doesn't involve us trying to not just focus on binaries and binary distribution, which is our area of expertise, but going out and trying to become security experts and not doing either well, then but we are hoping that somebody's going to come out and really make this openly available. And I know that there are some initiatives in the community to do that.
Well, yeah, you can have an open API that you can plug in different vendors.
So we have an open API.
So we don't have to pick Black Duck with somebody else.
Yes, but the Black Duck configuration works out of the box. The open API, you actually have to do the work to get it integrated. That's kind of the difference.
One more question.
Yes.
I saw you have Gradle, Maven. Do you have a replacement for Maven release plugin?
Oh yeah, we're perfectly compatible with Maven. You don't really need the Maven release plugin because the Artifactory release plugin does everything the Maven release plugin does and more. But yes, I showed it with Gradle, but I could have done the exact same demo with Maven or Ivy if I had wished to.
So does it support Perforce?
Jenkins supports Perforce, so it's about, yeah, we tap into Jenkins for the source control. So whatever Jenkins supports, we support for source control. But the plugin may not be able to do everything with some source control options. But the main ones that Jenkins supports, we also support. Any other questions? Yes? Can Yes, in fact we did during the build. I was kind of quiet about it, but if you had actually looked at the console output of the build, where is it? It's not in the console output because I don't have my output verbose enough. But in fact, all of the artifacts came out of Artifactory. And that's why when I went and showed you the dependencies, it knew where they were. So yes, when you set up your build, you're actually setting up both resolution and, you see here there's a resolution repository line right here, and that's where it's pulling its artifacts out of. Yes? So I think you said, how do we handle hosting of YUM and APT repositories? Yes. So yes, Artifactory absolutely has inbuilt support for YUM and Debian repositories. If I were to just go here and hit new, you can see the list that we have, and here's a YUM repository. There's a Debian one. And when it does that, it automatically updates the metadata every time a new package is published to the YUM repository. It updates the YUM metadata and the repo data for that YUM repository so it's accessible immediately. Sorry, you're far enough away I can't really hear you. We scale pretty well. I'm trying to think what our biggest YUM repository is, but it's receiving artifacts quite rapidly. We did have an issue at one point. We have a quiet period where we try to wait 30 seconds before we recalculate the YUM metadata. And we did have a customer that was pushing a new RPM to his YUM repo more than every 30 seconds. And therefore his wasn't getting calculated, except we do have a way to calculate it manually. And then also we worked with that customer to give him alternate solutions on calculating it even more quickly than waiting on the quiet period. With any YUM repo, because the metadata has to be a file, there is certain intrinsic limits that the architecture applies to how fast you can update the repository. But our experience is that that so far very, very few customers have ever run into those limits. And when they do, we can usually work with them for an alternate solution. Either by setting up some sort of cron job to do a manual calculate, or by shutting down taking those quiet periods down to very, very low numbers. Of course, if you take the quiet period down to a low number and you're constantly recalculating the metadata for the entire repository, that does require a certain level of hardware and CPU speed to be able to go out and perform those database transactions. But one of the big advantages is because it is primarily a database transaction, it's much faster than some other mechanisms have when it comes to trying to calculate what the YUM metadata should actually look like. Yes? So, absolutely. So the Android SDK uses Artifactory to do their builds, and which doesn't actually answer your question about mobile artifacts, but yes, we actually have quite a number of customers that use Artifactory and to some extent even Bintray for storing app artifacts. The only catch there is that Bintray is not an app store. If you want to go through, that end of the distribution we don't worry about. There's this company called Google that takes care of distributing things to your phone, and we have no desire to be in competition with Google. But all the rest of it, yes, very many customers use use it for Android packages. At the end of the day, we really don't care what type of binary you store. We'll store pretty much anything. I even streamed video out of an Artifactory server once just to prove I could. I do not recommend, by the way, setting up your own private YouTube at work. It can get you in trouble with your boss. Does that answer your question? Other question? Yes?
How do you discover licensing that not in the metadata?
So if it's not in the metadata at all, then you're going to have to manually add the license. There's a here. Yes. So so for example, if I'm here on the general tab, it says licenses. It didn't find any. I just hit add, and it pops up the list of licenses.
But the problem here is the artifact itself has no license info.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
This artifact has no license information, and I can add it for myself. And we come pre-stored with like the 50 most popular open source licenses, or you can add your own licenses as well. Yes?
Who's your main competitor?
Who is my main competitor? So that depends on what you're talking about. For Java building, the demo I just gave, the main competitor would be Nexus. But if you were talking about our Docker registry, then our main competitor is Docker Enterprise. And if you're talking about Ruby gems, then our main competitor is probably GemFury. Really, if you're looking for somebody who does everything we do, go out, look the market. I think you'll find that we're the only ones that do everything. Other questions? Okay, I am actually a little bit over time, and I'm sure all of you want to get lunch. So thank you very much for attending.